Oh my god. Hello, and welcome to a little a little wrap up video for July. And let me show you what I got. What the chef's been cooking. Um I got to pose JoJo's pose. So this is all my books for July. As you can see, there's not that many, but that's kind of because the Mistborn books, they're not super long, but they're just a little longer than your average book. So, um, they took me a while longer, maybe, to read. Even though I got through Well of Ascension. It's raining outside, if you can hear that. I got through Well of Ascension kind of quicker than I thought I might get through it, but, hold on, I gotta move it. If I move it here, I don't know, because the camera's right there, but my monitors are like there. So maybe if I'll put it all the way over there. That's fine, actually. Um, so yeah, let's just go through on. The first book I read this month, in the holy month of July, was this, Vengeful. Wait. Vengeful. I need to correct the color. There you go. Bam, the autofocus. How's that for a shot, right? Hey. Um, it's look. I gave this book a 4-star, and in all honesty, do I think it deserves a 4-star? I don't know how to. Okay, I think this was the correct way to do it. Do I think it deserves a 4-star? At the time, I definitely did. I remember I was like, "Oh, it's like really good." I think it's like a 4 or 5. The more time that I've given this book, and the more kind of thought that I've given this book, it's definitely leaning more towards a 3. Am I going to change that on Goodreads? Probably not, unless I have a distinct reason to. But it's more just because I just don't think it aged that well. And I think the content of the book, I was more excited for the book than the outcome. But I kind of gave it a little bit of forgiveness points, maybe. So it got a 4. But I do think it probably deserves more like a 3. Just because when I critically reflect and think back to this book, there are quite a few negative feelings that I have towards it. But it's a follow up of the superhero dark fantasy, urban fantasy thing. Vicious, in the villains. So the first book is Vicious. The series is called Villains, and this is Vengeful. So it's kind of a lot to remember, but I still would recommend the series. I think the first book is actually really great, and they look really cool, so I'm kind of impartial to that. But I think it's worth going out and reading them. I mean, you might find more out of this than I did. I can't really spoil too much about what happens, but basically she adds a lot more characters. Like strong female characters, and V.E. Schwab even came forward and said that this was like, the book that was going to display strong female characters, like being girl bosses, doing like not having to adhere to like my headset turned off. Hold on, let's turn it on. Give it the bright lights. Bam. So it was kind of, that was what was happening, but I actually feel like she almost did the opposite without spoiling anything. She kind of made the female characters in this book fall a little bit flat for me. And for that reason, I'm kind of not too inclined to recommend this book, but I think the first one is still really, really great. I gave this one a 4, kind of leaning more towards a 3 now, but I'm just going to leave it at a 4. I'm not going to change my shit around just because looking back on it, I don't feel as hot on it, because I'll give myself a little bit more time to critically reflect, because it's still only been within the month. So that was Vengeful by V. Schwab. Kind of a letdown, but it's still an exciting read. It's still a decent sequel to the first one. Um, and I think there's just I just really love the world a lot. So when, maybe she hits a character or a couple story beats that don't really rock with me, it's just a little disappointing since I love the world so much. It's a similar thing to Rhythm of War, where I love Stormlight Archives so much, and then to see it dip in quality just for a little bit, it's so disheartening, and it feels like a lot more of a dip in quality than maybe it would have if I didn't love the series as much, if that makes sense, right? So if it's a series that you love and it dips in quality just a little bit, it's going to feel like it dips in quality a lot. Or on the flip side, you're going to kind of ignore the dip in quality. And this is a point in time where I think initially I was ignoring the dip in quality, but now I'm really feeling it. So that's that. I'll move the fuck on because I don't want to go forever. They both die in the end. Not a great read, but certainly not as bad as maybe I make it out to be. I gave this a 2-star, and I've got the shiny golden collector's edition with all random shit in it. These pages are so ugly. I don't know what the fuck is going on. But I got this from the bookstore, and this version was like cheaper than the original, or it was like the same price. So I just grabbed it because I was like, why not? It looks interesting. Collector's edition, I'll collect it. And it's got it's got these little like demo pages, like notebook pages from the author's notebook when he was writing the book. So it's kind of interesting for that regard. Not that I've read the extras because I don't really want to, but it's there. They Both Die in the End is a story about basically our main characters live in a world where on the day that you're going to die, you wake up and you get a phone call and they say, bitch, you're gonna die. And basically we follow two main characters, Matteo and Rufus, who get the call, obviously, and they, the title is, the title hints at the ending, right? When you go into this book, you're like, well, do they actually both die in the end, or is it gonna be some kind of fake out or something like that? So I wouldn't necessarily say the title spoils the story, but it definitely is kind of like it's gonna be a fake out if it doesn't spoil, if that makes sense. It hints at what the ending might be, but obviously you can't be 100% sure because there could always be a twist or some shit. And yeah, basically it follows two. I think one is Puerto Rican and one is half Latino. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember exactly because the contents of this book are quickly escaping my mind, but I know that they're not non-white. So we follow two non-white LGBT characters, and that is probably the highest praise I can give the book, is that it does allow for quite a rich representation, I suppose. Just quite an interesting take, new character archetypes that maybe modern literature doesn't show as much, even though modern literature there is a trend of showing a lot more of these kind of characters, which is really great. And I applaud this book for venturing into that path. Now, the actual plot or the story or the world, the premise of the book, I guess, was what I was most excited about when I was reading it. My headphones died. I'll leave them dead. And this was the point where I got the least amount of satisfaction from this book. I really wanted an interesting conversation about how maybe this corporation came about. What are the intricacies of this plot line? What are the potential plot holes that could arise? For instance, suicide. Is it impossible to commit suicide if you haven't gotten the phone call? Or is it, I don't know, like what's the whole deal there? Does it take out the autonomy of death, someone's ability to kill themselves or someone's ability to kill someone else? Because say I woke up and my best friend didn't get the notification, is it completely impossible for me to kill him, even if I just run at him with a knife while he's sleeping, right? Because there's not really the air for not killing in that scenario. So I really wanted them to tackle those plot holes and figure out what this crazy organization is that's calling fucking people up and telling them they're going to die. But it doesn't really. It really doesn't go into that. It's more just about the characters. There are some interesting dynamics about how consumerism and capitalism have kind of come into play with this new organization that calls people on their death day, but I didn't find those to be compelling at all because it was just so not believable. And if you, I won't go into detail, but if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And Rufus is just not a great person. He is an evil little bitch. Because at the start of the first first chapter of the book is Rufus doing something completely like horrible. Like you detest the guy, right? It's not a nice thing to do. So then the whole book is basically like a redemption arc for Rufus because he committed this awful act, and now we get a day of redemption or whatever, and it just seems fake deep. I will say it's quite entertaining. It's quite a page turner. It does take place over the span of one whole day or 24-hour period, that kind of thing. So if you're into that, if that sounds exciting, it is pretty exciting to read. Like every scene is going to be taking place 5 minutes after the next. It's definitely keeps you on your toes. There are a couple of death fake outs, but they don't really land because like the fake out will happen here, and it's like, well, we've got the rest of the book to go. Like I know these bitches aren't dying yet, maybe. But you know what I mean, right? It's like that. It's just never gonna fly. I don't know why the author even tried to do that. Mateo is an okay character. He kind of is a little bland, maybe, but it's fine. There's definitely some emotional points in this book. It covers a lot of heavy topics, but it does so really lightly and doesn't really interact with them in much of an interesting way. And all the side characters just seem like they were written after in the editing process. Like I actually don't think there's a single chapter from a side character point of view that doesn't seem like it was written in after the whole novel was done. And they just serve no purpose. They just kind of have an outside observation on something that happened maybe, and just the most surface level kind of comments about it. So this is very surface level. It covers grief. It covers, all the things that you would expect it to cover. Maybe not as much like race and stuff like that, but it does have that as representation. So it doesn't really cover the issues of race and of sexuality, but it just covers the issues of dying, more or less, and the strangeness that comes with that. But it's all very surface level, and it feels like this would work really well for a young teenager or an adolescent, or maybe not adolescent. It's quite a dark, grim novel, but for someone to learn about grief who isn't very mature is kind of, and I don't mean that as an insult. I just truly do mean that it doesn't cover these topics in any kind of real depth that I think an adult would get too much out of it, but I've heard adults like it, so say that they like it, so I'm not going to completely take away from that. And next we got these two fellas. I'll talk about The Final Empire first, which is the first novel in the Mistborn trilogy, and completely not surprising, but I loved it. I thought it was great. I just think it was so good. Basically, we follow a young girl called Vin, who's struggling to survive in the underground of this empire that oppresses the race that she's from, the Scar people. And it's kind of the whole premise of the Mistborn saga is, what if the Dark Lord won? Like, what if the evil tyrant won? And what would his empire look like? Because, in all the classic fantasy, like, the good guy sweeps in at the end and wins. what happens if the good guy didn't win, and what would that world look like. So that's kind of where Mistborn begins. And this book kind of follows Vin meeting up with a gang of thieves, or I guess a crew, a thieving crew, who are a lot more experienced than she's ever known. Like, she's grown up in these shitty crews, and suddenly she gets put in with the best of the best, and she's like, oh damn, like what are we gonna do? And they decide they're gonna try and overthrow the empire. So that is kind of the touch points of this book. That's all I'll really say. A lot of great stuff happens. The magic system is really cool. I will say I think I prefer the Stormlight Archives magic system, but I do think this is a really interesting magic system, and there's a lot of elements to it. It does get a touch confusing for me to read sometimes, and it's not because I don't understand what's happening, but it just doesn't translate 100% clarity sometimes. How all the different aspects of the magic system are working together, say in a fight, for instance. Sometimes I can just kind of be like, what the heck is going on? Because there's so much stuff happening. Sometimes it just, the clarity on that decreases a little bit, and so it can be a little hard to understand what is exactly happening. Whereas the Stormlight Archives magic system is really quite simple when you read about it. And so I'll say I prefer the Stormlight magic system, not because of its simplicity, but just the way that it's introduced to us. This is very like all at once. You're going to learn the entire magic system right here, right now, bitch. Whereas Stormlight Archives is different. And bear in mind, the Mistborn trilogy has multiple magic systems. So it's not just one magic system that covers the whole thing. There's multiple. I won't say how many because it's a spoiler. Or maybe not a spoiler, but I won't say how many different ones there are, but there are a few. I really liked the ending of this book. I thought it was good. I thought it was super solid. I didn't like it as much as I liked Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. They're definitely better Brandon Sanderson books, but I would say maybe I would equate this one with Way of Kings, which I think they're both exceptional starts to a series, and I think Way of Kings, for me, just falls a little bit below Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, just because when I first read it, I didn't quite understand what the plot was going to be of the whole series, whereas this book is kind of the complete opposite, where it's like just plot. Like, here you go, here's some plot, and here's a lot of plot. And then when you get to the ending of this book, there's a decent cliffhanger. I wouldn't say it's a cliffhanger, but it's definitely something to give you a lot of intrigue into the next two novels. And while Way of Kings also had cliffhanger and intrigue at the end of it, it didn't feel like a complete narrative in and of itself, whereas the Final Empire is a bit more of something that you can, you could stop here. You don't have to read the other two if you don't want to, and I feel like you would still get. Brandon Sanderson says this himself, that you would still get a complete holistic narrative experience. So I think that is a definite plus. But I do think the world of Stormlight Archives, for me personally, is just more interesting and more engaging. But there's a lot more page time to accomplish that as well. You have to admit that Mistborn really doesn't get as much page time, unless you count Era 2, but I don't know anything about Era 2, so that's that. Then lastly, 5-star, obviously. 5-star, but like a weaker 5-star, more like a Way of Kings 5-star, where it's 5-star, but there is, I don't know. It's hard because I do love this book. I think it's great. I have pretty much nothing negative to say about it. Same as Way of Kings. I love that book. I think it's amazing. And then we got The Well of Ascension. This is a secondhand copy, so it does look a little bit more beat than this one, for hold them side by side. But save the trees, really. Save the trees. This book is better. This book is way better. maybe not way better, but this book is so good. It's a lot longer. This book is like 830 pages, whereas the first one is only 700. So it's like 150 pages more. Um, and as you can see, it's quite a bit thicker. And so this book is both longer, but also the pacing is way down from the first one. So the first one, there's a lot that happens, there's not really time skips, I would say, but a lot of time passes, a lot of stuff happens, a lot of big changes are happening throughout the world. Whereas Well of Ascension is okay, press those brakes, chill the fuck out. We're gonna have some political intrigue. We're gonna have some deep character moments. We're gonna discuss a lot of things around morality and ethics and these deep-seated beliefs that these characters have, and we're gonna really dive into it. There's quite a lot of intrigue, political intrigue, but also just kind of mysteries. There's a lot of things that show up that maybe we need to investigate. Is all I'll say. And I haven't really talked about characters too much because, I don't want to discuss too many characters that I think it would spoil one way or the other how I'm speaking about them. So I'm just gonna say in a very general sense what I think about the characters from both novels. So I'm not gonna say too much about each individual character per book because potential for spoilers if I did, which I don't want to spoil anything in this one. I'm also really excited to go on to the next novel after this one because this in a similar way to the first book, it kind of leads you. It's a holistic experience reading this. Like the ending is very satisfying, but also it does leave a lot of threads to continue on to the next novel. So I'm excited to read the next novel. But I might give myself a little bit of time because there's a couple other things I want to read. So characters, obviously, Vin. Vin is great. How should I hold these? Vin is great. I think Vin is a cool main character. I think she's exciting to read about. I can tell that she would annoy some people, but I think she's really interesting, and I think Vin is a compelling main character. She's got a lot of trauma and a lot of shit like that from kind of being on the streets as a child. So there's a lot of that we work through, but it's exciting to work through. And talking a little bit about Vin, female characters is something that I did express. I wish there was more strong female characters in the Final Empire. We do get a couple more in Well of Ascension, so kind of ticking a couple more boxes more or less in that sense. But the series definitely does start without many female characters, which is something to think about maybe. It didn't impact my reading experience too much, but I was just a little disappointed. We have Kelsia. Kelsia's a freaking great character. I love Kelsia. He's kind of the experienced, strong one, and I think he plays that role really well. Kelsia's great. We've got Doxson, who's great. I guess the whole crew are really cool. The character development among Kelsia and the whole crew is really, really good. Even though they don't really take central stage all the time. I mean, Kelsia does take central stage, but more like the crew. Characters like Ham, Doxson, Breeze, Clubs, Spook. I can't remember who else is in the crew. That's pretty much it, I think. And then Vin and Kelsia, obviously, but they're more main character, and then the crew is more side character. Like Breeze is one of my favorite characters. I really love Doxson too. Clubs I'm not as interested in. Ham I'm a little indifferent towards. Spook is cool, but we haven't really got too much outside of the basics with him. And then we have Sazed, I don't know, who's like probably my favorite character right now. I just think Sazed is amazing, like actually incredible. Such an interesting character, such a well written character. If you know, you know, is kind of what I'll say about Sazed. Holy shit. Um, and then Elend, who is an incredible character as well. I loved Elend in book one. Um, and I won't say I didn't love him in book two, but I didn't have the same kind of for book one. It was like I'm screaming about Elend. I think Elend is the best character, and I was all about Elend in book one, and then I was all about Sazed in book two. Um, so you know, that's I guess an interesting observation, kind of thing, because I think book two is a lot more Elend focused, but for me, my kind of love for his character didn't fall off because I still think his character's great, but kind of he just became so much more complex, um, and that was still fun. But I think for me, I think Say's just kind of stole the spotlight. Um, really, in terms of side characters, I mean, Vin and Kelsier and whatnot, they're all there, but there's always a side character you really want to grab onto, and I guess they're more side in book one, and they become more main in book two, I suppose. Just because the way it develops, I guess, the story and whatnot. Um, so I'll kind of leave it there. I mean, there's a couple more characters I could talk about. Um, Tindwyl, Alrian, um, Straff, all those kind of people I could talk about. But I'll leave it because it's hard to talk about them without spoiling anything. But I really recommend it. I mean, this book for me is probably like just under, probably Words of Radiance. No, just under Words of Radiance. So there's like this and Way of Kings. Then there's this slotted right in between them, and then there's Words of Radiance and Oathbringer on top, and then Rhythm of War kind of hanging out down by itself for now. But that's my rating of the Cosmere so far. What I've read. Um, yeah, yeah, but they're all very close. I mean, like the difference between Way of Kings and Words of Radiance is like nothing, but this book I feel like manages to squeeze its way in between. So that's how I feel about that. And I've been rambling on for quite a while. So those are the four books I read this month. Currently reading The Lies of Locke Lamora, and I started Shadow of the Gods, but I'm not really sure what's happening with that. So, yeah. Bye. See you next month.